Here
It's
we go.
official, episode number 1
Congratulations.
with Angie Thurston. Yeah, I was holding out. I had my heart set on a conversation with you for the first episode
Oh,
because
that's so nice.
I think the process of formation had to do with a lot of previous conversations. And if I'm being completely honest, and I hope it's okay bringing this up publicly, this is
Go
something
for
I
it.
saw
Well, I
you
don't know.
doing.
What is it?
Yeah, this was something I saw you doing. I don't know if this was like a slow play on your end. If I just
Waiting for
don't do it
you
for a while.
to.
Yeah. He'll do it if I just don't do it for a while.
There we go.
So,
there we go.
Yeah. But
well, you can now be my inspiration for whatever's coming.
okay.
There
Yeah.
you go.
Okay. Well, for the record, I think you do much better at it than me.
Well, let's.
Oh well.
I think we need as many soulful, smart people talking about spiritual growth as possible. So,
Sure. Yep. Soulful, yes. Smart, maybe. No.
I will be the judge of that, and I'm going to say I'm in very smart company today.
Well, maybe that's actually a good place to start, just to just lay out what exactly I'm doing here, because like the idea of another podcast, or even calling it a podcast, feels a little bit cringy to me. But
yeah, I've been having that same inner dialogue, not about you, but about myself. So yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. And well, I've just been having so many conversations with people over the years about personal spiritual growth, and several people have said to me, well, why aren't we recording this? Why aren't we putting this out there? But then for me, it's just all sorts of that inner voice just saying like, why would you do that? Or having these self-doubts. But especially in the past 2 years, I just felt like I've needed some sort of creative outlet. And I've been asking myself, how can I be of more service? And as I say that, it makes it seem like this is some sort of big deal, which is completely not my intention.
I think any creative act that is born of that sense of, it sounds like there's been this nudge that has led you to do it. I think that's a big deal. I think it's a big deal when you have that inner indication, and then you listen and actually take the steps to bring it into being. So I think it's a big deal. I'm celebrating it.
Yeah. Well, I shouldn't say it's small, but I'm trying to do something very simple, right? And get myself out of the way, put my ego aside, all my self-doubts, because that's really what's been stopping me in a lot of ways is, I don't feel like I'm good at articulating my thoughts, and I have trouble getting my words out. But then lately I've just been like, just forget all of that. Who cares?
Yeah.
Who cares? But
well, and it also just, I think it helps me, and I'm sure it will help other people. It's like there are those stumbling blocks and you do it anyway. It is also a message in and of itself to the other person who's listening, who's thinking, well, I couldn't possibly do whatever it is that I feel drawn to do because of all of these stories I tell myself. And here you are doing it. So that's
whatever it's going to be.
Really, really cool. Well, exactly. Yeah. Whatever it's going to be. So, it's a really auspicious experience to get to do it with you.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, a lot of this, I was looking back at the history of just, not just development of whatever this is, but my spiritual growth over time. Taking part in the Progress Project, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, was a huge impact in getting me to do something, like just to move forward and feel like I'm activating something within. something that I'm being called to do, whatever that is. And yeah, so I'm sure we're going to talk about the Progress Project. I definitely want to, but
Yeah, sounds great.
yeah, and I got better at journaling and writing things down, setting intentions through that
Yeah,
process of doing
cool.
the Progress Project and talking about my spiritual goals, along with having conversations about personal spiritual growth. One of the things I really want to do is encourage people to open up to the possibility of relationship with something greater,
Hmm.
um, God, spirit, call it the universe, whatever language you want to use. Um, that's a huge motivating factor, and also promoting spiritual values, because I feel like it's something we don't hear talked about a lot, right?
Definitely not enough. Yeah,
Yeah, I it's been a lot of amplification of fear and confusion. I do think we need some voices, especially when um, it, of all the things I'm not sure of in this life, I feel like I
hmm,
have a strong spiritual foundation to build off of.
yeah, yeah.
So
Me too, which I feel really grateful for. It's a
yeah,
big deal. Yeah, yeah.
well, let's talk about that. Your personal history and getting to where you are now. Like, can you identify events in your past that you see as being crucial to, or like stand out as being really significant in your personal spiritual growth?
Definitely. Um, I'm just thinking back to the beginning, and it's interesting because I can definitely talk about what I was given. I think a question that I still have is the question of temperament and a certain predisposition. I think that I did come into the world with a propensity to delight and a propensity to sort of experience reality as very amazing, borderline miraculous. There was something in my constitution that I think was inherently oriented that way. And I could have come into a family and a situation where that would have been kind of systematically snuffed out, right? So it's not to say that the nurture had no role. I think it had a significant role in my spiritual development. But I also think there was an element of predisposition and a sort of temperamental bias toward thinking that reality had meaning and that it was uh, good, which is just interesting. Like, I don't know how to account for that really. But I used to be so excited that every time I got to eat a meal, it was like, wow, or just getting to sort of experience the different. I remember being in elementary school and being so touched by the natural world and getting to, I don't know, there was just a sort of affinity that I had without any particular language for what any of that actually meant, of course. So with that as a template or a sort of palette to work with in my inner life, then I was raised by two spiritual seekers. Both of my parents were spiritual seekers long before they met each other, and certainly once they found each other, that was a pretty essential element of their connection to each other, and then also their parenting. And by the time I was born, they had both become familiar with this book called the Urantia Book, which became the central spiritual text in my home. But there's no organized religion around it, and we didn't participate in other organized religions particularly. Uh, and so a lot of the orientation that I was given through both my parents and a connection to the Urantia book was one in which I was kind of responsible for my own spiritual growth and my own spiritual life, and encouraged to pursue it. Uh, but it was very much a marriage between spirituality and creativity. from the beginning, the sense that it was not just going to be given to me. I was given a lot of information in the Urantia book that that I had the opportunity to explore. But in terms of my connection to God and my life choices and how I oriented my actions, that was up to me. So that's just sort of the seed bed, I guess, in terms of what were the key moments. I think that foundation was very important. And I think both the positives, which I'm naming, and I would say one of the two things that I maybe wish there had been more of that had definitely informed the way that I try to live as an adult and the way I'm trying to parent. One of the things I wish there were more of was just a larger experience of community and the collective more consistently. And I think my parents wanted that too. And there were a lot of situational reasons why we didn't have that. But I think that was one element that would have furthered my spiritual life more from a young age. And the other would have been, I guess, and it's connected to the community element, but more lived examples of people sort of intentionally, consciously cultivating their spiritual lives. I had a lot of conversation about spirituality with my parents, and we did have a bunch of sweet rituals as a family and things like that. But I, I didn't really see. It's not to say they were. I know they both were actively cultivating their spiritual lives, but I really didn't get to see a life of practice or many lives of practice modeled around me in a way that I was made aware of. So I think that was the other element that I've come to really value as I've grown. So that was some of the DNA. And then I think in terms of key moments, I remember a dream of being in a clearing in a forest, and I was wearing these kind of cloth handcuffs like this, and they were all different colors. And it was clear to me in this dream that these handcuffs represented different religions. And I remember in the dream saying essentially like, I am not this, I am not that, I am not this, I am not that. Um, but I am all of these, and I am also free. And then kind of breaking these handcuffs, uh, because I mean, I think at the time I was connecting it to my knowledge, my very fledgling knowledge from the Urantia book, but this idea that uh, I was both part of this world that had religions, but then there was also something beyond that. So that, I mean, it's just, I don't remember any dreams that I
How
had
how
as a
old?
kid. I barely remember dreams that I had as an adult. So that one definitely
Sure.
stayed with me. Hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's significant. How old do you think you were when that happened?
Yeah, I really don't know for sure, but I think that I was around 7, something like that. Just because I remember telling my mom about it. And it was one of those where I didn't really understand it. Like, I think I've grown into a more adult understanding of it. At the time, I just remembered it.
Well, there's some deep symbolism there,
I
and the
know, it
fact,
was very symbolic. Yeah.
yeah, for that to stand out, that is significant.
Yeah, it was definitely impactful. Um, so I think there were a lot of, I mean, that's one moment that stands out. I think there were a lot of developmental moments along the way, and I'm happy to dive into any of them, but I'll just name maybe one or two more that were later. When I got through college, and college was probably a low in terms of both my spiritual life and my life in general. I felt really empty and lost in those years, 18 to 22, and even a couple after that. Uh, I think I had, again, this connects to that absence around community and practice, and I had inherited a lot of information in the form of
It's
the Urantia
also
book.
generally a hard time for most
It's a
people,
hard
right?
time
Like time of
developmentally for a lot of
transition.
people.
Yeah.
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 I think that, yes, now that I know more about that in a sort of larger developmental frame, I think that that is very much what was going on. Like I was having all of these normal developmental questions and yearnings, and I was not at all in a container or in a set of relationships that could help me work through any of that. I was in a very secular university environment. I was away from home. I had brought the Urantia book to college and tried to go to a study group. There are these, gatherings of people who will study the Urantia book, but it was not a fit for various reasons, and so I never went back. I mean, I'm sure I also got preoccupied with my own college life, but so I really didn't have anything to anchor my spiritual life during that time, and I didn't feel familiar enough with the content of the Urantia book to really claim it. And there was nothing else. Like there was no other community or place that I felt that I could really go. So I just sort of floated around feeling lost and generally kind of unmoored. So it wasn't until my mid 20s that I dated someone who had been raised Christian Scientist, and he was not practicing, but he hadn't come clean about that to his family. So I went home for Christmas with him one year, and I was I was basically asked to kind of carry on the lie, you know, and sort of act as though he were practicing, and by extension that I was participating in that. And I mean that I don't mean to I really don't cast judgment on this person. I totally understand, because I was doing something similar, which luckily I was able to look in the mirror a little bit and be like, well, I'm so bothered by this person who hasn't come clean with himself about his own spiritual life at this point in his development. What about me? Right? Like, what's up with me? And so that was the point that I actually started going to a Urantia book study group in New York City where I was living, to basically say, well, with my adult faculties, what do I think about this? Does this book have any merit? And I also started casting about, just looking for other spiritual communities in the city. I joined meetup.com and just checked all the boxes for spiritual things. And I just sort of started searching as a young adult, right, on my own terms, as opposed to, and I think that is another frequent developmental moment in the spiritual journey, is that sort of addressing whatever one inherited, even if that was nothing, right? Even if that was a sort of um, a secular worldview, or a lack of participation in any sort of spiritual or religious life. So for me, that had to happen, I think, in order for me to mature spiritually beyond a sort of tacit acceptance, but also very passive relationship to my upbringing. And so I did have, I had an intellectual, I guess you could call it conversion. That feels like a strong word in some ways, but I feel like I had an intellectual assent to a set of beliefs that happened during that time. And then I also had a spiritual, a set of spiritual experiences that culminated in a very potent spiritual experience that I could sort of
Mm.
mark as a threshold. And I
Okay.
think the intellectual one was just, I began to accept that the Urantia book was what it claimed to be, which is to say that it contained revelatory information, and just that information was not passive. It's a very long book, but it's not a passive read. Like, if one is to really get into
Right.
it, it's got a lot in it that says basically, one is invited to devote one's life to the pursuit of God and the service of others. And so I really had to ask myself, what do I do with that inconvenient acceptance that I've come to intellectually, which is
Hmm.
really less about the book and more about how I was choosing to live and what I was choosing to prioritize. And then spiritually, I was having a really confusing time. I was having a lot of physical pain, some chronic pain that I was not able to address with the various medications that I was being given. And I think my mom was the one who said, you might want to talk to God about this, or you might want to bring this into your prayer life. Or she said something like this. And at the time it was basically like, well, I don't have that. you know, I don't have that. I don't have a prayer life. I don't, I don't bring God into the everyday things of my life. So it was so that was 2013, I think, or late 2012. Uh, at this point, what is that? 13 years
Yeah,
ago or so.
approximately. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the point that I started trying to actually connect with God for the first time. And I remember I say for the first time, I had this sort of wishy-washy, like I, I I never actually, I never actually went to a place throughout the whole time before that where I was like, God is not real. This is all BS. Like I didn't have a sort of a phase like that. Not that that's always a phase. Sometimes people commit to that view for their whole lives. Others, will sort of go to that place and then come around to a different perspective. I guess I was just not intellectually rigorous enough to actually like go down that path toward atheism in some sort of wholehearted way. But I had it was mostly just a belief. It didn't manifest in any real way. And so that was the first time that I actually tried to do something on purpose to cultivate a relationship with God. And yeah, so that was a very important developmental milestone in my spiritual growth, because it was really nothing at first. The first 5 minutes I tried to spend in my inner life were really just like firing synapses. And my main takeaway was, how does anyone get any clarity in here? Like, it was just
Right.
crazy in my inner life. I just couldn't
Yeah.
believe it. I
Yeah.
really couldn't believe it. So it wasn't until much later that started to be a fruitful thing. But I think I just had enough motivation based on the physical pain I was experiencing and based on my own sense of yearning for something more, that I stuck with it. And I really remember the leap of faith, because I was in such a secular environment that uh, everyone around me, or at least my projection at the time, was that everyone around me would think I was foolish for doing this. I really had a strong story in my head that the people that I respected in my peer group and all of that would think I was crazy for trying to connect
Right.
with God. you know,
Yeah. But it
um,
sounds like, you're talking about physical pain,
yeah,
and also there seemed to be some sort of internal suffering that maybe you're not in touch with exactly.
yeah,
Like, you don't have an awareness of it. But it's so interesting that so many people, that's really what it takes to move into some sort of spiritual path, is some sort of suffering, or the feeling of something not being right, or
totally.
something that's really painful. Both. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that does seem to be a consistent theme. And yes, very much so runs the gamut. I mean, I think sometimes, well, certainly much greater suffering can be part of that path. But yes, I was in a state of some existential suffering for sure, and some physical suffering as well, and confusion, just this feeling of, I also was very much part of what was going on at that exact same time, which also seems significant, maybe in others, the story of others as well, is I was doing things with my time. Like, I was working in nonprofits in the arts in New York, and it was fine. um, but I had this acute feeling that I was living a life that someone else could live, and that there was a life that only I could live that I wasn't living. It was very uncomfortable. I mean, and for a year and a half, I remember this acute discomfort, and it sort of corresponded with the onset of the physical pain as well. Was just this sense of, I called it brain pain at the time. I was just like, what is it? Like, what is my life, and um, how do I get it? Kind of, and like, what do I have to do to get out of this life that's not my life? It was such a strange experience. It was just like, I am competent at what I'm doing. but someone else would be equally competent, if not more so.
Right.
And there is
Something's not right.
there's something that, I mean, I think it was a dawning awareness of my own uniqueness, which I think all of us have, and all of us have unique gifts to give. And this sense that I wasn't giving them. I didn't know, but I just didn't know what to do about that. So I think part of it was also just starting to listen in a different way. I don't know if you've experienced that, Shayne.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah. Yeah.
it was like a different kind of attunement than I was used to. And it did come somewhat under duress of, okay, listening to the external voices doesn't seem to be getting me where I need to go. And it did start to feel like need. And so it was a sort of last resort to try a different kind of listening.
Gotcha. So put a pin in that for a sec, because you've brought up the Urantia book, and
Hmm.
you and I are both second generation Urantia book readers.
Hmm.
And this is something that's naturally going to come up as I have these conversations, because I cannot talk about my spiritual journey and growth without mentioning the Urantia book.
Yeah,
Can you just give like a brief explanation of the Urantia book?
sure. So the Urantia book is a 2,000 odd page book that that came into the world in well, over a period of time, but was published in 1955 in Chicago. And I usually call it a textbook on the universe. It is a book about the word Urantia in the Urantia book means earth. So it's a book about earth and life on earth. And it provides incredible context for life on earth. So it actually starts from the very macro of the biggest scale of reality and God and the universes of universes and, what all of the cosmic context for life. And then it kind of zeroes in on this planet and this planet's history and the way that life evolves. And then the last 700 pages or so are about the life and teachings of Jesus. And it contextualizes Jesus's significance, and then provides, to my knowledge, the most comprehensive depiction of his life on earth and his purpose for being here and his ongoing ministry, that's out there, really. So that's kind of some of the scope, but I think in terms of its status with me, at least, one of the things that I love about the Urantia book and that I also find challenging is it doesn't, in my view, it doesn't purport to be a sacred text in and of itself, in the sense that the book would have significance as an artifact. There's no author's name on the cover. If you actually believe the Urantia book is what it claims to be, then it does have a revelatory component. It basically was prepared and offered by a whole working group, basically of celestial students, people who are trying to support our evolution on Earth. So it
Mm-hmm.
was not written by God or anything like that, but it does claim to have superhuman authorship, which of course is a claim that I at least would never believe if I hadn't been studying it for 40
Sure.
years and had come to the conclusion that it was so replete that it couldn't have been written by humans, or a human especially. So that is its own. Most people, when they learn of the Orange Book, really want to know about that whole thing because it sounds crazy, which it is very
Yeah.
understandable. But to me, the thing that is most, again, sort of satisfying and also challenging about the book is that it basically has no meaning and no value unless it's lived. Like the book in and of itself, if it were just dropped here and sat on a shelf, would have no value. Its purpose is to interact with the lives of people who are interested in trying to understand what life is all about and then trying to live purposefully. And so the extent to which the book has meaning and value, I found, is the extent to which I actually pay attention to what it's saying and try to live that out in practice. And um and it really is given for this time and place in a lot of ways. It um so anyway, there's a lot more obviously that could be said about it, but the a big thing that it does that I really like and continue to value is that it harmonizes science and philosophy and religion in a really
Mm-hmm.
powerful way. And so, as
Mm-hmm.
someone who has always had a strong predilection toward the life of the mind and intellectual things, for me, it's very satisfying that I don't have to throw any of that away in order to engage the Urantia book. In fact, it's the opposite. It tends to be very stimulating and quite challenging intellectually, but never contradictory in this.
Yeah.
It's
Yep.
very holistic, and also really, really points away from itself toward seeking truth wherever you can find it. And
Yeah.
so that status, the humility of it, in addition to the authoritativeness of it, I find really gratifying and grounding.
Yeah. The book always seems to meet you where you're at, which
Yeah,
is
that's true
amazing.
too.
Like these,
Yeah,
if for me, it was like this unfolding of
nice.
concepts. And yeah, you have to approach it on the personal level. And I've had such a strange relationship with the book in a way because I got it again, second generation reader. So
Yeah,
my
yeah.
parents were readers of the book. So it was always there kind of in the background. But again,
Hmm.
we didn't have specific spiritual practices. We would talk about it. So it's hard to know at that age exactly what is going on because things just are sort of happening in the
Right.
background and influencing you. Um, but I do remember when right before my 13th birthday,
Hmm.
I was going through like some internal existential crisis. And it was specifically having to do with the idea of the devil and like this negative energy. And I was sincerely questioning that. What does that mean? What does that mean for me? Like
Mm.
something feels very important about my life. And I think when you described what you were like as a child, I
Yeah,
feel that
yeah.
same thing. Like everything
Really
felt big and like
nice.
important. Um, and so anyways, I remember this specifically sitting and praying to God, like, if you are real, I need to know.
Hmm.
And it's not even so much what I said with words, like this is happening in my head, but it's just this internal longing and this need. And then it wasn't even a month later that I got the book on my 13th birthday. And I don't know if I saw the connection immediately, right? It felt very important.
Hmm.
But across time, it's been over 30 years as a reader for me. And
Hmm.
most of that time, I haven't told anyone about it. Like I
Mm.
just don't talk about the book. It's been this tool for personal spiritual growth. I'm
Mhm.
sure I tried to tell people about it in high school and just got crickets, you
Totally.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right.
So, yeah,
It's a learned thing of like, oh,
right.
I've learned not to talk about it. And yeah,
That's right. That's
as a
right.
kid, as a teenager.
Yeah. But I do see, it's like how do you describe this thing? So, and thank you, by the way, for describing it.
Well, that's
um,
my description. I'm sure you would describe
sure.
it differently. Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody would, I think. But it's almost this impossible thing for me to do because it's really not about the book. It's
Hmm.
about this thing that is happening internally. And when you have that personal recognition across time of like feeling like you're getting closer to
Hmm.
God or the divine, um, how do you even put it into words. It's just this internal knowing, like,
Mhm.
I know the value of this thing and I would love to share that with people, but people need to be ready. And if anyone sincerely wants that information, it's available. And I believe it's available through many different paths.
Mhm. Absolutely. I know that's the funny thing about it is it's just right there. You can just read it for free.
Yeah. Yeah.
But my experience is that it's quite rare for someone to both find it or be given it and actually uh, take it in, choose to take it in.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I often find when I do have to describe it to people or I'm asked to, it's like I'm explaining this in a way that makes me sound like a crazy person. Like
Hmm.
just read it
Hmm.
and see for yourself.
Totally. Yeah, it's a hard one to explain. Yeah, but I mean, clearly it's something about it uh, met that when you had that prayer, when you prayed and then received that as a gift, clearly something in you responded.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For sure.
And what do you think that was like, how do you understand that now?
Well,
What was
I
going on in
think,
you?
well, specifically at that time, it's hard to know, but this alignment with spiritual values,
Hmm.
like these things that are real,
Hmm.
i- um, making me appreciate people more, like seeing the value of other people, just growing in love. Um, that
Yeah, how do you understand spiritual values, or how will you define that? Spiritual values.
um, love, beauty, truth, um, goodness, mercy, service, humility, gratitude, peace, like all these beautiful
Yeah.
spiritual things
Yeah.
um, that, you know, I don't know. It's something that's so hard to articulate, but there's this desire for more of that, to see more
Right.
of that, and then looking into the world and feeling like, oh man, we're not getting it,
Hmm.
and we like it seems so obvious in a lot of ways, and it is difficult. Like I have lots of work to do for sure, right?
Same.
Even with the text. However, it created such a strong spiritual foundation for me. I can see how everything is building upon that, and
Hmm.
those things that are building are good.
Yeah. Nice.
So,
Nice.
but
Yeah.
anyways, let's take the pin out back to you,
Okay.
um, and sort of the next step in your journey.
Yeah. Well, once I became clear that I wanted to dedicate my life to becoming closer to God and to more useful to other people, it really became a matter of doing that internal listening and finding my way toward what was next. So, in short, I ended up applying to divinity school and going to the question I was asking was, how might I be of service in helping to deepen spiritual community in this time of religious change? I was really responding to the widespread trends of religious disaffiliation among young people, especially in the West. So I went and I really did. I mean, there was one day in particular and one experience in particular that I remember as as another clear spiritual experience that is difficult to describe in words, but where I mean, I was literally just walking down the street uh, to a meeting on campus in the fall of 2013, and I just had this inner experience of, I mean, it was euphoria. It was a kind of euphoric feeling, and the language I'm able to give to it in terms of a sense of meaning was, I no longer fear death, and I am never going to feel alone again, sort of
Wow.
existentially. Uh, that was the quality of the feeling. And I literally remember being like, am I just going to feel this way forever? Because I felt so high, and I was just, there was nothing that that led up to it. It was really quite out of nowhere. But I think the other corresponding variable was just that I had made a series of choices that were the first time that I was consciously making choices in partnership with God, and where I was beginning to have an experience of doing that. And what it felt like was I got off the riverbank of my own life and into the river. So there was like a rush to that
Yeah.
first
And just
whole semester.
completely out of the blue.
Well, that one-off experience I had, and yeah, that was out of the blue, and I still can't account for it. But the more general feeling pervaded my whole transition out of New York and out of my job and up to Boston and into Divinity School and into this like river of my life. So I really did have a very significant inner shift toward a sense of purposefulness and a sense of fulfillment in what I was doing, after having experienced what felt in many ways like the opposite, like a real feeling of disconnection, sort of dissociation from my own life, and purpose, aimlessness, lack of purpose. So it was a stark contrast, and it continued, and it has not been a straight line, as it seems is a feature of the spiritual path. So I don't want to pretend that it has, by no means. But there was something that categorically changed at that time. And I would say that while there have been ebbs and flows since then in the last 12, 13 years, that chapter turn has occurred, if that makes sense. Like there's a floor that I used to be somewhere else, and now I'm here, and I don't know what's coming, in terms of my inner experience, but I've been building on a new foundation in that time. So I'm sure different people in different religious traditions would make meaning of that in different ways. I know some Christians will talk about being born of the Spirit and things like that. I think there's something like that happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
I gave myself in a new way to God and to my life. I dedicated my life in some way, that led to a whole new order of
Yeah.
experience.
I can definitely relate to that. It feels almost like a leveling up,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, how do you articulate what is happening? How do you put that into words or context? You just know it happened.
Right. And it's, I would not be able to account for any sort of leveling up in terms of my behavior or my actions in the world. But what and like, I mean, I hope that I continue to bear more fruit spiritually with, the vicissitudes of my own limitations and making mistakes. But like the thing I could feel experientially was like you say, a kind of leveling up in my inner life. Like the quality of my inner life changed and got better. So that I can definitely point to. Um, and yeah, I mean, there have been a bunch of other things since then too. That's the other thing about it. It's not, it's never boring. It's never static.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I had a question about Divinity School. What is that?
Great question. Divinity school. Well, so I went to divinity school at Harvard, which is divinity schools tend to be connected to uh, other institutions, universities, and historically they were created to train Protestant ministers. So divinity school in the United States is sort of a and I don't know all the story globally, but like at least in the context I was in, they historically have been places to broadly train people for the vocation of ministry. And and they can also be a place, this is something that has developed over time, where people just go to study religion. So that happens there too. Um, so that was true at my divinity school. It was both a vocational school, and that was the program I did, was a 3-year long Master of Divinity degree, which is such a crazy name. But anyway, which was really the one about putting faith into practice. And then there are other degrees that are more about studying religion, studying theology, studying philosophy, studying religious history, that kind of thing. So it's all in there.
Um, the decision to go to divinity school, how did that all come about?
Well, I was in that year and a half of brain pain that I mentioned, and I was trying to figure out what to do. And I had a roommate who went to Harvard Divinity School, and she was one of the people who went to study religion. She went to study like medieval religious relics and ended up going on to get a PhD in art history. Uh, but it was because of her that I even became familiar with the existence of Divinity School. And then there were a few other clues along the way from some. I was kind of in this list, like I was saying, like a new kind of listening stance. So I was trying to follow a breadcrumb trail, asking God, what what do I do with my life? I was really in this sort of constant question. So yeah, I just I found out about it, and I tried to convince myself to apply to other divinity schools because it seemed ludicrous to only apply to Harvard. But I couldn't make myself do it. Like there was a sense, a combination of what they offered with this sort of inner, I don't want to call it inner knowing exactly, but certain inner gravitational pull.
Yeah, you're just like, I'm going
um,
there.
Well, I didn't know I would get in. I wish I did. I wish I had that kind of certainty. But no, I didn't know I would get in. I didn't know I would go, but I knew that it was what I wanted in a way that I couldn't shake. And so I ended up using my application to try to create a blueprint for what I wanted to do, because I was like, I didn't study religion in college. I don't even belong to an organized religion. Like, not to mention the sort of academic standards, right? So I was like, it seems very likely that these people will not take a religious weirdo like me. And so I really tried to just take advantage of the deadlines and the rigor of the application to try to articulate to myself what I wanted to do and what I needed in order to do it. And so I was lucky enough to actually go there, but it was also an important exercise for me, I think, to go through the process.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like it was foundational for things that have happened to you since.
100%. Yes. Yes. It changed everything. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your thesis? So you did, it was on how we gather, right?
Oh, well, that would have been a very logical thing to do, would have been to make that my thesis. Actually, so my first week of my first year, I met a fellow called Casper, who became a friend, but basically a work partner. Like we started working together as grad students because we were interested in these very overlapping trends that we saw around us. And so we started working together, making things, including this report called How We Gather, which was about essentially religion like things happening in secular settings. Uh, we started doing that on the side. So everything I created with Casper, including that report, I did not get any academic credit for. Yeah, it was sort of a bad idea from the standpoint of my grades. Well, it was fun. Really, I went to divinity school knowing that I was doing it in some ways as a lily pad to what I wanted to do with my life. And so I tried to, even though yeah, by some standard, it definitely was a bad idea just in terms of how I was stretched time wise, but it was very much aligned with the reason I went, which was I knew no job would exist for me on the other side, and
Mhm.
I was going to have to make my job. And so I basically set out to be entrepreneurial from the week that I got there. And so that was part of it. But yeah, so we wrote this report called How We Gather, and um, then have gone on to write like 7 more reports over the last dozen years about the changing religious landscape and the emerging forms of community and spiritual life around the US and now around the world.
I don't think a lot of people realize how they replace their spirituality or their religion with something. Like they put
Hmm.
something in that seed. It was so funny, the little synchronicity, because I don't know if it was a video I watched or a podcast you had done, or if when we were talking, but you had mentioned CrossFit. And
Hmm.
literally that day, I was thinking, man, CrossFit's a religion,
Hmm.
and then you pointed that out.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, that as an example of there
totally.
is
Totally.
this inner need in someone, even if they don't consciously know it's there, and they just start putting
That's right.
other things in its place.
Absolutely. And I think my upbringing, and I'm curious about yours too, but I think my upbringing really prepared me to see that clearly. I think because I had grown up with such a spiritual orientation and what in many ways felt very much like a religious upbringing, but without the trappings of organized religion, it was just very clear to me that religiosity could live out like in the verb form, basically, that people could be personally spiritual and have spiritual longings that they would bring wherever they went, regardless of how they might identify or not identify religiously. And so I think it set me up to see and be very ready to believe that people were having spiritual experiences and cultivating meaning and connection and purpose in nominally secular environments, and that if they didn't have a sort of official place to bring those longings, that they would bring them to their workplace or bring them to the gym or
Yeah,
wherever
yeah,
else they would go.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So that's been a big part of my work in the world in the last decade plus, has been trying to support people who, especially the people who lead those sorts of communities, in order to
Gotcha.
meet the needs of those in their care.
Right. So let's talk about the Progress Project.
Yeah. Okay. Let's
when
do it.
when does this all fit in, and obviously describe what the Progress Project is?
Okay. So the Progress Project at first was a little idea that I had with 2 of my friends, May and Liz. Uh, and this dates back around 10 years ago, probably, that we started exploring this. And it really came about because both May and Liz had also grown up with the Urantia book, and we were all reflecting, I think, kind of similarly to this sort of grievance that I articulated toward the beginning of our conversation about being hungry for more community and more practice around me. I think we were expressing to each other how we wished that we had more around us to support our own spiritual growth, and that we could be held in some kind of structure of loving accountability around our genuine desire, each of us, to become closer to God and more useful to others. That's sort of the shorthand that I'm using in describing that. And so we had originally been, I think, just studying the Urantia book together, discussing for a while, and then we ended up getting together in person. They lived in Colorado and California, respectively, and I was in Massachusetts. So we had a little watershed weekend where we actually got together and said, well, we can't do anything about the rest of the community right now, but what could we do about this for ourselves, given
Hmm.
that this is a desire we share? And so we just created a sort of minimum structure for ourselves in order to work on our spiritual growth. And we called it the Progress Project, because it was basically our attempt to make progress spiritually.
Right.
And so we started meeting regularly, I think every other week on Zoom, and we developed a little template for ourselves about setting spiritual goals and trying to realize those goals. And it was very clear to all of us, I think, from the beginning that an essential element of this would be actually dedicating time every day to connect with God.
Hmm.
And that was one of the main things that we wanted to hold each other accountable to. And so we just started doing that for our own edification
Hmm.
about 8 years ago now, I think. And we found it to be very beneficial, very fruitful. And so we started, I think it was a mix of us starting to share what we were learning with others, and then others also expressing an interest in learning more that led to it growing after that.
Yeah. And the thing that always strikes me about it is it's in concept, it's so simple,
Hmm.
but has such massive implications.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how
It
did
was a big deal for us.
um I guess talk about the results from actually doing it?
Yeah. I mean, it, it was the thing that really solidified the practice of daily communion with God for me. It was definitely the vehicle for that. And as things do, it has evolved over time, and we don't use all of the same sort of infrastructure that we used to. But when we first started, for a number of years, each day when we would take set aside time with God, and I would usually take 20 minutes, we we would, I think we used the Insight timer, so we had that sort of shared digital record of it. And then we created this really nerdy little Google form that we would use every day after that time, each of us, to record these like very basic data points of, what time is it? Where was I? How long did I do it for? And then any insights that came up, and then any reflections on the experience. And so we have this incredibly nerdy spreadsheet of like well over 1,000 entries of the three of us, of our, like this little record of our daily communion with God. And I think, I mean, I can certainly report changes in myself and in my relationship with God. I think one of the most moving things about it has been getting to witness changes in my sisters, getting to see May and
Yeah.
Liz grow over 7, 8 years, and also accompany them through real struggles, as they have accompanied me. It's very moving. And just, I've
Hmm.
seen them grow in experience and spiritual confidence. I mean, even just literally, we always open our call. So we still have calls, and we always open our calls with each of us getting a chance to uh, just say something to God out loud. You could
Mm.
call it worship or prayer, but we go around and each of us just takes time to share out loud, and um, to get to hear the confidence with which they now speak to God. It's like, it's so moving. It makes me emotional just to think about it. Like, it's so beautiful to see others so intimately growing. The Urantia Book talks about how we enter as a child and that we have the opportunity to grow into spiritual adulthood, basically. And I feel like I've gotten to join them in that journey and to really see it happen. So that's been really powerful.
Yeah, and I can attest to that because
Yeah. So where did you pick up,
yeah.
Shayne? Tell us, how did you get connected to the Progress Project? I mean,
Well,
I could
actually,
fill in a gap. Yeah, we
yeah, you
basically,
probably
like,
should.
I'll
Yeah.
fill in a gap, which is to say we ended up turning it into a course that we offered through this online platform called Urantia University Institute, and offering this model to others in the Urantia Book network who wanted to pursue spiritual growth with this particular structure. So that's how that, so you take it from there.
Well, if I remember correctly, it was our mutual friend, April Helen, who
Probably
first
so.
told me about it, or at least encouraged me to do it, because I was like, yeah, sounds amazing. Everybody should do that. Yeah, but I'm too busy. Right.
Yeah. Right.
um,
Oh. And
so
April Helen, I should just shout out, like she was really the one who spearheaded. She was part of that second group of three that after May, Liz, and me, and she really is the one who spearheaded turning it into a course. So she's a
yeah,
great
I
a
mean,
great evangelist of this work and also a real author of it in that iteration.
yeah,
Yeah,
she's amazing. When I think of the word service, when I think of April Helen,
yeah, for
and
sure.
I'm going to be talking with her in a couple weeks too. So looking
Hey,
forward
great.
to that. But yeah,
That's
I'm
great.
pretty sure she was gently pushing me
Yeah,
to take part.
yeah.
I'm guessing this was 2023. I'd have to look back in my notes, but I got matched up in a triad. Shout out to
Mhm.
Allison and Juan. Um,
Yes.
and so yeah, I just got to witness firsthand what it's like to get together with a group. And I didn't know Juan. I didn't know Allison. We were, but it really felt like we were meant to be matched together.
Yay. That's so
Um,
great.
and I think we started meeting monthly, um, for an hour and a half. And yeah, we each, there's formality to it, right? Like the time we set for each person to talk and
Hmm. Hmm.
um, to discuss our spiritual goals and to connect to God. And again, this is something that for myself, even with like I consider myself a spiritual thinker.
Hmm.
Like I'm kind of constantly thinking, but it's hard for me to just sit and pray. Whatever, for whatever reason, it's just difficult to do that. But that accountability to everybody and knowing there's this thing that we're going to do and just talking about it, opening up your spiritual life to others, something happens, something real happens. Um, and it really is hard to put in to words exactly what happens, but you're just witness to some sort of growth across time and
Yeah.
this inner, I guess I just, I think of the phrase, the peace that passes all understanding,
Yeah.
you know? Um, but, and again, it's such a simple concept. Get a group of friends together, 3 people, get together
Hmm.
regularly,
Hmm.
set some time, talk about your spiritual goals,
Hmm.
um, and see what happens. Just be willing to
Right.
try it.
Yeah. It is remarkably simple in so many ways. And yet I think there's a lot of inertia, like you were saying, right? It's like, oh, that's something everyone should do. I'm too busy. I think even in the circle, this was something we found because we offered the course a number of times. Even we really encouraged everyone to make it their own and to take everything we offered as an invitation. And then because, you know, every group of people is different, right? And every sort of unique constellation is going to have its own uh, spirit, which is so great. But I did notice that in a number of cases, there was a kind of gravitation that would pull it toward like, well, we'll make it we'll study, or we'll just, we'll talk, and we'll talk about our spiritual lives. Like there was this sort of this, I think there's just something about, perhaps it's the intimacy of really, really witnessing someone else's relationship with God and really sharing one's relationship with God and those longings of the heart. I think maybe that's part of it. Like it's a very intimate thing to do. But even for people who actually had signed up to do this course and to be in these groups of three and to pursue it, even then, I think there was a wide range of what people ended up doing, you know, and I think the groups that tended to have the most longevity were the ones where they actually did go there and found their own way to really support each other in some sort of genuine change, right? I mean, those who were the most affected by the Progress Project or have continued to be, and I think you're one of these, Shayne, in the way that we've talked about it before. It's like it really actually opened up something new in their relationship with God, you know, and that's why it mattered, right? It has nothing to do with the rest of the sort of scaffolding. Like that's just there to facilitate that movement. And the
Yeah.
groups that have stuck around, that's actually happening, which is so cool.
Yeah. And that being sort of a stepping stone to other things. It's like all these
Yeah.
other things
Yeah.
start to open up
Right.
when
Right.
you open up in this way. Like if you sincerely ask to know, you
Yeah.
want more, like you
Yeah.
better be prepared because stuff is going to
You
start to
might find
happen.
yourself on a podcast talking about
Right.
spiritual growth. Yeah.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. No, it's just, yes, exactly. And I think that's another reason that sometimes things go the other way is because it does require contending often with some level of fear. There's, um, there's a great line in the Urantia book about it's like thinking men and women feared Jesus because of what he will do to them and with them, and all
Yep.
such fears are well founded.
That's right. Yeah.
Something like this. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, be careful what you ask for because it is
For
a
sure.
rugged path. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but it's
Rugged and
also like the most, yeah, the most meaningful thing in the
yeah.
world. So,
Yeah. It's like I see it as aligning yourself with your true purpose and discovering what that is in relationship with God. Um, I just had a thought right there about the Urantia book. What
mhm.
do you think are the most revelatory concepts or things that stand out to you as being extremely revelatory?
Yeah, that's a
Because
great
I have
question.
one,
Okay,
which
do you
would
want
be
to kick us off?
the thought adjuster, like
Yeah,
this
what is that? Tell us about
idea
that.
of God within or your higher self, that its whole purpose is to lead you forward down your spiritual path. And all you have to give it is your will,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
And so I think that's what's really happening in these situations like the Progress Project is like you're aligning with that will. You're saying, yes, take me down the path.
Right,
And yeah, there might be
right.
bumps and challenges and all these things, but that's part of the process. And for me, when I start um, going against the flow of
Mhm,
secular materialism,
mhm,
I feel like this soul response,
mm, mm,
right?
yeah,
Um, it just
nice.
feels right. But anyways,
Yeah.
yeah. So thought adjuster, big one. If I know a lot of people have not
Yeah.
heard of that, but yeah. Anything else? Other revelatory concepts?
Well, just to wrap one thing around what you just said, Shane, I think part of what I love about the Urantia book and why I sometimes describe myself as a spiritual nerd is because there is a way in which it will take concepts that exist in our sort of religious teachings and sort of um, add specificity and nuance to those. So a lot of traditions talk about the idea of divinity within or divine light or an inner teacher or right there is a lot of, especially the mystical strands of many religions point to that inner spark. And one thing that I find revelatory about the way that it is depicted in the Urantia book, and it's even evident in that sort of technical sounding language you just used of the thought adjuster, right? There is the kind of describes our job on earth in many ways is to cultivate the growth of our soul, and that our soul is essentially this, this future identity that we will have beyond this life, that we get to actually co-create with God. And so there is this mechanism happening inside of us anytime we make a decision and take an action that has spirit value, where we're actually building something with God, something in
Yeah.
ourselves. We're also contributing to something beyond ourselves, and that's a whole other element that we could talk about. But as it relates to this inner spark of God, when they describe it as a thought adjuster, the reason for that, or a reason for that, is that part of it's like the work of this divine essence we carry is when if we give God our will, like you said, then God will help to adjust our thinking and our deciding and our acting to become more like God, and to become more expressive of those spiritual values that you described, right? And that process contributes to the growth of our soul. And so there's just a kind of mechanism. And, I think there's been some pushback, at least in Western culture, against the mind. A lot of Eastern traditions will sort of talk about the mind as a distraction, this language of the monkey
Right.
mind that's often used in
Yeah.
meditation settings and things like that. And I think part of what the Urantia book does, first of all, is help to expand the concept of mind. So it's not just about the brain. In fact, it's not about the brain at all. It's really
Mm-hmm.
about this sort of interstitial level of reality between the physical and the spiritual, and the part of us that gets to work in that terrain to try to move toward the spiritual. So the thought adjuster is working in that intermediary space in us that is more than physical, but not yet spiritual, and trying to help us get there. And so the more that we can actually harness our thoughts and direct our thoughts toward God, the more that we equip ourselves to live out, God's will in our lives. So that just the whole mechanism there is one big thing. And then the last thing I'll say for now about revelatory concepts is the other major revelatory concept in the Urantia book that I find very motivating is its depiction of the afterlife and the cosmos and the kind of what awaits us. There's an iconic line in the Urantia book where they say the universe is one vast school, and it depicts this as the beginning of our eternal career if we choose to continue. And that's another thing about the Urantia book, is it does not have a uh, concept of hell. There's no version of that, but there is a presentation of choice, ultimate choice that we do have, and that God is always attentive to the faintest flicker of faith. But if we really want to, over the eternal timeline that we have, if we want to will ourselves out of existence, eventually we can do that. But if we
Mm.
choose to continue and choose to keep discovering more of meaning and value over eternity, there is like an eternal adventure that awaits us after this life, and it is so amazing and organized. The Urantia book presents an organized universe and a friendly universe, and it also does a really good job, in my view, of accounting for why things are so screwed up on Earth when put against the backdrop of that really well organized universe with a loving God at the center. So I find all of that very helpful and very motivating in terms of why should I bother giving my attention to spiritual growth.
Yeah. Well said. Good job. See? You did that better
Great.
than I ever could.
I don't know about that. I'm just like very enthusiastic about these things.
Yes,
Yeah.
as we should be. All right. So let's bring it up to today. and where you're at now and what you're doing.
Great. Well, this is a very timely conversation for me because we we really are talking about my favorite topics and the things that feel the closest to my heart. I think the Progress Project is a good example of something that I have co-created because I am so passionate about spiritual growth and want to support. I want to continue cultivating my own and to support others in doing the same. So, um, I lead a nonprofit that I co-founded uh, in 2018 called Sacred Design Lab. And one of the big things we do there is to support spiritual innovators. And those are the people that we talked about who are leading these communities that help in some way to support people's spiritual lives at this time of so much change in the religious landscape. So that's been a big part of our work for really ever since I put out that report, How We Gather, that we talked about more than a decade ago. But the other part of the work that we do at Sacred Design Lab that I am stepping into, so you're finding me at a real threshold time, is all about supporting spiritual growth and supporting trying to support spiritual growth holistically in our culture, but with one emphasis on supporting the spiritual growth of leaders, namely people whose decisions have outsized impacts on other people.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so one way that that's showing up is that I help teach a course at Harvard Business School that I co-created with a big team, called The Spiritual Lives of Leaders. And so that's one avenue where we're really trying to introduce some of these concepts. But I am in the midst of developing some other offerings along these lines, which are not yet realized. So I
All
will keep
right.
you posted about that.
In process of formation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm always blown away when we've had conversations about, the things you're working on, and it's one thing to have the concept and then to put it into action to make
Hmm.
it happen.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm just blown away by it.
Thank you, Shayne. Yeah. Well, you have been a wonderful thought partner at key intervals, and I feel very much, I think part of my work in terms of spiritual development, I feel like there's always what we are drawn toward in our spiritual development and then what gets in the way, right? And one of the things that gets in the way for me is definitely a sort of inner set of obstacles related to creativity and just bringing new things into the world. I've done a lot of it, but I think um, it's almost like the closer it gets to the bone, like the truer it is to my own sense of what's in my heart of hearts and my deepest understanding of my own vocation or what God is inviting me to do. It's like the closer it gets to that, the more layers of the onion get peeled away, the more vulnerable it feels, I guess, and the the scarier. And so I've really had to, and this is very much a real time process. I am not on the other side of this process. Um, really had to give myself to God and a devotional stance in a new way to
Hmm.
really I think a word that I have come back to a lot in my prayer life is this word undefended, to let myself not be defended against the world or defended against God, in so neither in my inner life nor
Mm,
my outer life, but to really just be available to whatever is being invited and to do it. It's like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
to kind of unblock that inner stream, and I'm really working on that. It's not easy for me. So,
Do you have a daily practice, daily spiritual practice?
So I still, all these years later, have a daily practice of communion with God. And for many years now, actually, that has been a walking practice. So I had many years of taking time with God, sitting quietly as sort of the way that I did that. And then I don't know, maybe 7 years ago or something, it started shifting. And so now I go drop my son off at preschool and then I take this walk around a loop near my house. And that is my opening to the day. So I
Hmm.
greet God, I greet the day, and I just sort of talk through the things of my life with God and try to listen and, be present. So that continues. But I've had a number of other, I guess, especially as it relates to this creative set of questions. I've had a number of other practices that I've taken on just to try to make headway with this. And so I've done the artist's way, which some people may be familiar with, is a great resource. I have it sitting here right underneath the Urantia book, actually. So here's the Urantia book. And then here's the artist's way for anyone who's not familiar. It's very well trusted among many people who have gone on to find a sense of creative freedom in their lives. So that has been a really valuable thing in the last year. And it's very much a spiritual text. It really talks about creativity is as a process of aligning one's own creativity with the divine creator, the great creator.
Right.
So that's been helpful. And then I've been doing I there's a modality called core energetics, which is all about trying to work in a somatic way, an embodied way with basically stuck energy. So that's been something I've tried in the last 6 months or so, just because I've been so attuned to this way that it feels like there has been a sort of weight on top of my sense of creative freedom. So I've just been trying to work with that from different perspectives. But the thing that is still missing and that I have been working on, but is still a work in progress, is as ever that experience of ongoing spiritual community. And I do have strong ties for 7 years now with a beautiful community in DC. I live in Northern Virginia, a community called Recovery Cafe DC, which is it's uh, it's the particular pastors who lead it are definitely rooted in the Black church, and there's a real strong kind of Christian vernacular in the space, but it's all about inner and outer transformation, and it's really, really powerful. So that's been great. But what I don't have is something that's like a regular cadence that includes my whole family. And so my husband and I are working on that, of trying to cultivate home-based spiritual community where we live. And we've run some experiments. We've had a few gatherings, and it's a work in progress. Our son is 4, so we're kind of,
Yeah.
entering into that stream at this key
Sure.
moment where he's starting to be more available for things like that. um, but I do have a study group with my mom, a Urantia Book study group that is just my mom and her partner and my son and me. And we tend to do that every other week or so. So that's been a good thing to just get to share with my son in hopefully age appropriate ways. We just do
Sure.
sweet
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
with him. But
Yeah.
so that's there. So there's a constellation of things, but that community element is a longstanding longing of mine, and we're working on it. And time will tell. Like, it may be that we find a way to join existing communities as well in a more
Hmm.
thoroughgoing way. So far,
Hmm.
that hasn't happened, but it could, so I'm trying to stay open to, I think I've had a strong barrier when it comes to, being part of communities where there's a belief system being articulated that doesn't resonate enough.
Right.
But we may be able to work that out, and we may decide that it's worth it to to do that, even if it involves a little bit of intellectual compromise.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
so yeah, that's some of the trappings of it.
Yeah. Yeah. But still feeling that need for community. And I get that too, right? Like,
Yeah. Do you guys participate in
as
anything like that?
no, no. And I think that's why I see so much value of actually um, doing something, taking time out of your day to set aside. So there's that as an individual, but
Right.
then also experiencing what it's like to do it in a community and the benefits of that. Yeah, so it is natural to just feel like there's a longing for more of that, but yeah, always a work in progress.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think having kids, you have 3 kids, um, that just introduces a whole new dimension to the whole thing.
Yeah, nothing shows you how much work you still need to do than
Yeah.
having children.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. Yeah, I thought about that this morning actually, because my son was in a very whiny mood, and I dropped him off at school and then went for my walk, and I was thinking about how I was gonna speak to you today, and, it's all so nice, and it's so, right, but that all happened after I dropped him off, and when he's in his it's like that particular whiny voice, I feel like was evolutionarily designed to just like right, it's just, oh, it's the
Yeah.
worst, but it also is such a it, it as so many have said before, it's also such a revelation of God, getting to
Yes.
experience unconditionally loving a whiny 4-year-old when
Right.
he's right in the midst of his
Yes.
meltdown is like, I adore you. I am
Yes.
so fully, madly in love with you.
Right.
And this
Yeah.
is like not my favorite.
Right.
Right. It's just holding
Yeah.
those at the same time.
There's no way God cannot be real in a moment like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. My God. Well, if God, yeah, right. If there's, if God's putting up with us,
Yes.
yeah,
And
that's our
yeah,
opportunity to learn how.
for sure. Well, Angie, number one in the books.
Hey, well done. Well done, my friend. To many more.
Hopefully. Yeah, thanks so much. It's always so great to talk with you. And yeah, hopefully we'll have some more chats.
That would be great. Let's plan on it.